making a trek down to architecture yet again. Our usual seminar room has been taken up by an all-day course. Anyway, so I'm very pleased to present Farzaneh's exit seminar today. So Farzaneh came to us from Iran with a degree in electrical engineering, and then she took the plunge into bioengineering research, looking at modeling electrical stimulation of the retina. And so she's going to tell us all about what she's done with that.
Thank you. Hello everyone, and thank you all for coming. So let me introduce my research to you. My research has taken the first and the important step towards developing a patient-specific model of human retina by incorporating the real retinal structure. And this model, for the first time, has allowed us to represent the performance variation in retinal prosthesis. And the model has the potential to be employed by clinicians to optimize their device parameters and provide consistent performance for future candidates. And to me, it is a game changer for retinal prosthesis market. Now, let's see what all this means actually. There are many people in the world who are blind. That is another one. Maybe here. Is it good? Okay. There are many people around the world who are blind because part of their retina has been damaged. Their photoreceptor cells have been damaged. An example of this condition is retinitis pigmentosa, or RP, that can leave people completely blind by the age of 50. Another example of this condition is age-related macular degeneration, or AMD, that can leave people legally blind. Now, how retinal prosthesis help these people? One way to do that is to have a teeny tiny camera on a set of sunglasses that can capture the information of our world and can transfer this information instead of electrical signals to an array of electrodes which has been implemented at the surface of the retina. These electrodes will stimulate the intact part of the retina and can provide a sense of vision. Encouraging results have been reported. Patients who were blind for many years have been able to have light perception, or shape recognition, or even in some cases reading clocks or letters. That is just awesome. Imagine that you're blind for many years and all of a sudden, after a surgery, you can read letters. That's just amazing. One thing is missing though. Using a complete same device, there is a significant performance variation across our subjects. For example, most of the patients are able to have light perception, but very few of them have measurable accuracy. And this is not good. We want to sell this device to people, and we have to provide and promise our future candidate that we're going to provide a particular performance for you. And having this variation, this significant variation, is not good. A number of reasons have been attributed that why we have this significant variation. Some of them are like the states of the disease and how long the patient is suffering from it. But we think that some of these factors can actually affect the activation threshold. So if we look at the literature and look at the measured activation threshold for each of our subjects, for each of the electrodes, we will see there is a significant variation within and across the subjects. So it means that if we use a fixed level of current for all of our subjects, it will not work. It will not provide the same level of performance for all of our subjects. So to address that, currently, after implementing the device in the patient, after the surgery, clinicians pass their patients through multiple follow-up meetings and then they tune the device for that particular patient. As you can imagine, it is quite time-consuming, it is costly, and in some cases even impossible. Imagine that the number of electrodes increased to, I don't know, several hundreds. You cannot do that for individual electrodes. Or the patient might need to travel back to their city. It's not just the patient is not available for several follow-up meetings. So we think there is a better way to do that. Computational models is a powerful tool that can mimic the response of retina into electrical stimulation and can help us to optimize the device parameters before or after the surgery. And that can minimize the required follow-up meetings and can help us a lot. If we look at the existing computational models, we can categorize them in the main three categories. We have single cell. In single cell, we can have a good understanding of the activation threshold for each of the element cell, or how the activation propagates along the axon. But it only gives us that. It doesn't tell us how the retinal network interact with each other. So in the next step, we have discrete representation. When we look at the discrete representation, we have a chain of cells, a chain of retinal cells, and how they communicate with each other. So in that regard, it is giving us more information. But discrete model only gives us a chain of cells. In the reality, we are talking about a tissue, a retinal tissue, an area of the retina, and an area of electrodes. So the discrete model just gives us a very narrow understanding. To have a larger understanding of what is going on in an area of retina and an area of electrodes, we're going to use continuum modeling. Continuum modeling gives us an average of hundreds of cells and can give us more information compared to the other types of modeling. When we look at the existing computational models in continuum modeling, they have used cubes to represent the retinal structure, and they were not patient-specific. By saying that it was not patient-specific, I mean that they did not represent any performance variation that we see in the clinical studies. So, the first step, the main objective of my thesis was to advance this model towards a specific model that we are actually incorporating the real human retinal structure and its curvature. One of the main reasons for that was that after the onset of the disease, the retinal structure undergoes a lot of deformation, and it's going to be different from one patient to another. So that can be one of the reasons that we have such a variation in our clinical studies. So how did we achieve that? OCT imaging. Optical coherence tomography imaging, or OCT imaging, gives us a good representation of the retinal structure. And if we have multiple images and combine them together, we're going to have a 3D representation of the retina. So all we need to do to have the retinal structure is to segment this image and take it out. How did we segment that? If you look at the OCT image, there is a good contrast between the retinal structure and the other part of the image. So we just applied simple canalage detection, and then we extracted the real retinal structure. And then we applied Gilbert wavelet filtering to filter in the inner retinal structure, and then we had another canalage detection so we could detect the retinal borders. The result of it was summarized in one of our publications. So this is one of our OCT images and how we have segmented that. If we say that any detected borders is just a continuous number of points sitting beside each other, we would say that there's a lot of information. We don't need to deal with all those information. So we down sample our detected borders, or we digitize it, so we are dealing with less number of data points. And if we repeat that steps for all of our OCT images, so we have multiple OCT images of one particular subject, we segment that, and then we digitize it. For each of our retinal surface, we're going to have a 3D delta cloud. And if we map our delta cloud from our image coordinate to real Cartesian coordinate, we can have a beautiful delta cloud that is representing any particular human retina. this. However, we would say this is discrete points. The real retina is not discrete points. It is a continuous smooth tissue. So we need to find out some functions to represent that. We achieved it during mesh generation. Here we thought we don't want to start our mesh generation out of the loop. We looked at our data plot. We selected some of the data points as nodes, and then we linearly connected them together. So we could have the initial mesh of each of our retinal surface. And if we repeat that, the same procedure for all of our retinal surface, and then we connect them together, we're going to have a 3D representation of the retina. The problem with this initial mesh is that, as you can see, there are some dark areas over there. These dark areas represent discontinuity in the derivatives. And as I said, retina is a smooth continuous tissue. So we have to address that. We address that during fitting process. So we use the method described by Bradley et al. And we optimized the parameters for retinal structure, and we came up with this beautiful smooth mesh. And when we compared it to our acquired data plot, we had less than 9 micrometer RMS error for each of our retinal surface. So we acquired beautiful smooth retinal tissue out of our OCT image. Now that we have our tissue or mesh ready, we have to represent the, the mesh generation was reported in one of our publications. Now that we have our mesh ready, have our structure ready, we need to come up with some sort of equations that represent the retinal network. To do so, we use a set of equations introduced by Dr. Setal in 2005. So if we look at the retinal tissue, we would say that these outer retinal layers that we don't have activation, we model them like a passive model. And then where we have the activation, we use bi-domain equations to represent the activation. In the previous model that we saw in Dr. Setal, they had used a constant surface to volume ratio for their model. So they had assumed that the number of cells that we have through the retinal tissue, they are constant. But when we look at the literature and we look at the ganglion cell density, we will see a huge difference, a significant difference from the center of retina to periphery. So again, we took one step further to make our model close to real human retina, and we incorporated that cell density variation in our model. To represent the activation pattern of the retina, we use the equations of Abramian et al. And we implemented that for the first time in CellML. So in the future, the model is present for any person that needs it, and it is free to use. One of the key factors for retinal prosthesis is that we need a number of electrodes to provide a sense of vision, because each single electrode would just have like one spot of light. But we need a combination of it, like pixel by pixel, to provide a meaningful sense of vision. We need an array of electrodes. And it is important to have a distinct activation pattern. So we examine different electrode configurations to see which one would allow us to have the most focalized activation pattern. If we say that each of these pink are the injecting electrode and the gray are the returning electrode, we had bipolar electrode configuration, we had tripolar configuration, and we had hexapolar. Comparing them, we saw that we had the most focalized activation in hexapolar electrode configuration. So we chose that as the electrode configuration for our model. This is how they look like in the electrode side and the electrode spacing. And the results of it were summarized in one of our publications. Now that we have our tissue ready. We have our equations ready. We're gonna explore different subjects. If we look at the surface of the retina and we have from this image, we would come up with such an image. So we chose 3 main points. We had subfoveal pit, which was mostly the center of the retina that we had the highest accuracy of vision. And then we had 1 millimeter centricity and 2 millimeter centricity. The square represents the mesh boundary, and each of the dots represent the location of the electrodes, that hexapolar electrode that I just showed. Here again, I have summarized everything. So we have a fundus image where the mesh is located, where the electrode is located, and similar in OCT image. OCT image would be go like inside the plate, if you say so. And that's how the electrode configuration is, and this is our mesh, and where the electrodes are location in the mesh. We will start by our healthy case number 1. We stimulated the 3 sets of stimulation with our 5 sets of electrodes, and we applied 2 milliamp per millimeter square. As you can see, we only had 2 sets of stimulation that had been activated. So we increased the current to 15, and then we came up that, okay, in foveal pit, we had more number of activation than in 1 millimeter it increased to 3. But in 2 millimeter centricity, we still do not have activation. We increased the current gradually, and we got to 30. And 30 was the maximum amount of current that we could actually apply to our electrodes to avoid any effect on the electrode. So when we look at it, yeah, we could have activation in 2 millimeter centricity, but it was at the cost of losing and having overlapped activation. And overlap activation means that we are losing our accuracy. We summarize this simulation in sort of like a matrix. So if I say that activation, if I don't have activation with that current, I would put 0. And if I have activation with that current, I would put 1. And if I have overlap regional activation, I would put C, which is standing for calcite. We repeated all these simulations for 5 healthy cases and 5 disease cases, and we came up with these matrices. Now, what does these matrices tell us? It was actually very exciting. For the first time, we could represent that how we have performance variation across our subject and how it is different within our subject. For example, if we look at the disease number 1, we see that it doesn't have any activation, whereas disease number 4, it had 6 activation. And the same, we had repeated some sort of variation from 12 to 15 and 30. So it tells us that using a fixed level of current, it will not provide us the same level of performance. And we need to optimize the current. That was the first time that we could represent it using computation model, and that was quite exciting. Now we would say, okay, we have this variation, but do we have any representation that why is it happening? So initially we thought about the electrode's distance and different layers of the retina. So we said for that particular current, if we had activation, we categorize them in 2 categories, using that current and that has been activated and not activated, and we applied t-tests. We found out that in all of our applied current, in ONL, we had the thickness between activated and not activated were different for these 2 layers. And the RPE layer was not actually playing that much. And that can be important for future clinical studies because we can actually measure only these layers, the thickness of only these layers, and come up with a clear understanding that how far our device would work for that particular patient. we came back to literature and we thought we want to make our model as close as possible to the existing data, make the model useful for future clinicians. So we wanted to see how we can represent the same thing. So when we look at the literature, what they had done, they had measured the activation threshold for each of the electrodes that they had implemented. And they had sorted from the lowest to the highest. And also they had plotted such a diagram, and they had measured the activation threshold based on the electrode's distance to the target cell. So we took that as a guide to do the same for our model. We measured the activation threshold for each single electrode for each of our subjects. And we sorted that from the lowest to the highest for each of our subjects. The interesting thing that we are getting from this is that, again, we have activation differences within and across our subject. And second of all is that from the subfoveal, which are the center of the retina, to peripheral to 2 millimeter, generally we can say that the activation threshold is increasing. And that was aligned with the study that we had in the clinical study. That was very interesting because it was, again, the first time that we could represent this fact using the computational model. We repeated the same simulation for the disease subject, and we came up with the same sort of output. Next, we plotted the threshold based on the electrode distance. I don't want to go inside all these data, it is scary. But all I wanted to say was that we came up with the same output, with the same result, that when you increase the electrode distance to the target cell, the activation threshold increased. And that was aligned with the clinical studies that we had. So what did we achieve? From single cell and discrete model, we chose continuum modeling to say that we have an area of retina and we can model an area of electrodes. And we advanced that model towards a specific, patient-specific model, and we incorporated the anatomical variation between subjects. And we incorporated the ganglion cell variation in human retina. And we came up with a model that for the first time could represent the performance variation that we has seen in clinical studies, and has the potential to be employed by the clinician to optimize and come up with the clear understanding of the activation threshold. Thank you.
Thank you, that was quite fascinating.
Thank you.
So I was intrigued by your initial description of the retinal implant. You said there's a camera that sits outside and then it sends signals to
That is one way to do that.
And so is there a physical connection between the camera and
There are two ways. The newest one, it is wireless, so it's just send the data into human eye. But in the older versions, there were wires that connect.
Farzaneh, just two questions. One is, do you take account of lateral, or how do you take account of lateral inhibition? Presumably when you...
Sorry?
How do you take account of lateral inhibition? So normally when you stimulate at a certain point, the rods will improve the resolution by laterally inhibiting neighbors.
You mean that the activation will propagate? Are you referring to that?
Well,
Am I
there's
getting-
neural connections, which just mean that you can sharpen up the image as a consequence of inhibiting the ones around the particular point. It's called lateral inhibition.
I'm not sure if I get your question, but there are two things that I can...
Well, I haven't asked a question yet. Do you, when they do the electrical stimulation
Okay.
of those rods, is that still giving you that lateral inhibition, or do you know how the cell? Are you just looking for the response of a particular group of rods in a given area without worrying about any attempt to use that natural sharpening mechanism?
So as far as I know is that for our case, the initial response was more important, that we stimulate and then we have the initial response. In the retinal tissue, the cells are not connected to each other, so we won't have the activation propagation. That is all I can tell you, but I'm not getting the question, sorry.
And how, the other question was just what sort of resolution are they optimally aiming for? If you look at the cochlear work, they found that 22 electrodes is sufficient to give you very good reproduction across the frequency spectrum. So that's never changed. They've kept the 22 electrodes in a one-dimensional form. For the retinal case, what would they like? What's the optimal number of electrodes, or what's the optimal spacing do they think to be able to?
So they have used normal sighted person, and they have asked the patient. So they have like a screen and then particular pixels to be lighted on, and then they try to sort of mimic and say that how many pixels are required to have understanding of the picture. So what they have come up with is that maybe several hundreds of pixels are required to must have a good picture of it. Yeah, that's a good one. So, for example, if this is the picture, they would say that around several hundreds of electrodes would give us a little understanding of what is going on. In the reality, what they have so far come up with is that so we have two commercial device right now going on in the world. One is in America and one is in Germany. In America, it is about 60 electrodes. That's the highest that they have achieved. And the German one is around 1,500. But because of the electrode crosstalk that they are facing to, the 1,500 electrodes haven't shown really better performance compared to those 60 electrodes. And the electrode configuration seems to play an important part. And the electric crosstalk is actually preventing them from having a good visual acuity. So it's not about the density of the electrodes, it's more about how focalized we can activate the retina.
And the Australian one is presumed is 100 electrodes roughly, isn't it?
The American?
No, the Australian.
The Australian, I'm not sure about it. Those two I can't completely.
Yeah, the one that Socrates and Nigel were involved in.
It hasn't been commercial.
No, I know. But the number of electrodes is about 100.
Yeah.
Great talk, Farzaneh. In this graphical summary, you talked about personalisation of the retinal model that you're dealing with, and you talked about personalisation of the geometry, the thickness of the layers, and you mentioned, and I might have missed it during the talk, but you talked about building into that model the differing densities of cells in the model. The variation, but is that variation based upon personalised measurements, or is that variation based upon what is known about the human retina?
So what I have used was from Healthy Retina, and it was one study that they had few human healthy retina, and they counted that. We have some studies that they have measured the density of ganglion cells for disease retina too, and they have shown that for early age-related macular degeneration, that the case that I had for my case, there is not a significant changes in that variation. So using the data that we had for healthy was a good one for our case, but it was not patient-specific for our cases.
And there's no chance of being able to get those sorts of measurements on a per individual basis? Is there destructive tests that they would perform to measure that?
As far as I know, this is the case, yeah. You don't have question? I am surprised.
Give him a moment.
No, I do have a question about the geometry. It's sort of a colour one. Part of the advantage of getting the retinal geometry presumably is to be able to personalise or make individual specific the array of electrodes and geometry with that. Because I would have thought that the localisability of each electrode is critically dependent upon the offset, the distance that electrode is away
Yes.
from the retina.
Yeah.
And given that the retina is curved, are you able to use that geometry information to create a curved array of electrodes? And does that make a big difference over these small area that you are?
Yeah. So what in the commercial they are using is that they are hoping that the electrode array would actually follow the curvature of the retina of that particular person. So the material that you're using is supposed to follow the curvature in some of the studies, not the commercial ones, but not the one that has got FDA, but they are going towards that. But you're right. When we look at the literature, it hasn't, for the commercial ones, it hasn't followed the exact curvature, and there is a big difference. And that difference is actually affecting the activation threshold even more than the retinal thickness itself, which is it's not the ideal one. So what they are saying is that we hope that we can actually cover the retinal curvature in the near future, and also what I would say is that because when they implement the electrodes inside the patient retina, they leave it for quite some days before they start using the implant. And what we can do during that is that we can have OCT image and we can have the exact electrode distance after the surgery, and then we can optimize the electrode current for the implemented electrodes, particularly because in the clinical studies, it is very important where you are actually putting your electrodes. And it is human being and it is subject to error. So they have shown that when you put your electrode like 1 millimeter away from the targeted location, the performance has dropped significantly. So I think the model can help after the surgery even more. So we know where exactly the electrode is located and what is the exact electrode distance, and I can incorporate in the model and then come up with the activation threshold.
So in the model as it stands now, the variations that you see in the activation threshold are basically because of the variation in the geometry, or do you also have variations in the distribution of cells or the properties of the cells themselves?
In the reality, this is one of the factors that would affect the activation threshold is different cell types. So different cell types of the retina would have different activation threshold, and this is for sure. For my case, I only studied one cell type. I didn't incorporate any other cell types. So if I hadn't seen any variation, I would say this is the geometry that is affected. But in the clinical studies, there are a number of other reasons that are contributing to different activation thresholds.
Questions? If not, let's thank Farzaneh for a wonderful talk.